Today, a city becomes an experiment. In a 2019 pilot, Chicago allowed 10 companies to deploy e-scooter rentals inside a 50 square mile zone of the city. In the next weeks, the math of urban travel changed. Short rideshare trips jumped, bikeshare dipped, and certain crimes rose, along with hard questions about going green. Chicago's pilot program caught the attention of a researcher here at Gies College of Business.
My name is Unnati Narang. I am an assistant professor of marketing here at the Gies College of Business at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign.
For Unnati, the e-scooter deployment became data in motion and created a surprisingly meaningful collaboration.
I love studying how new technologies impact firms and consumers broadly. So for me, just traveling through US and even Europe, I started seeing the emergence of these new vehicles of transportation. They're lightweight, they're cool looking, they operate through a mobile app, and they're shared. So there's a lot of cool things about electric scooters. And I was always curious to see how they're impacting societies broadly beyond just marketing and retail and restaurant level outcomes, which had already been looked at in research. And in 2020, when I was very new faculty at Gies, a brand new PhD student walked into the door with similar ideas and questions, and his interest was in the mobility space as well. So together, his name is Ruchin Liu, he's graduated already. Together, we started exploring this phenomena, and we tried to look at multiple cities. Eventually, what you know now is published as a study about the Chicago e-scooter pilot in 2019.
That curiosity became a partnership and a bigger question.
Even if you look at Chicago, the whole motivation for introducing e-scooters was to improve mobility, improve access, particularly where access is most needed. So the hope of the cities was to expand access to the most disadvantaged sectors of the society. And there's a really cool report on it that came from the government that motivated us to really ask this question from a research and empirical standpoint, that are e-scooters intending to have these effects? Are they actually living up to the promise that governments are hoping for?
Chicago didn't just allow scooters in 2019, it geo-fenced them to a 50 square mile pilot zone. Inside that zone, they functioned normally. Outside, they didn't. That distinct line on the map allowed the researchers to compare with scooters to without over 41 weeks. That's a lot of data. We're talking over 8 million rideshare trips, 750,000 bikeshare trips, and 600,000 scooter trips, plus crime incidents and foot traffic data from restaurants and retail, tracked by census tract, week by week. So what did they find? In areas with e-scooter availability, short rideshare trips actually increased 15.7%, while bikeshare saw a 7.6% decrease in trips.
So if you think of this kind of novel new innovation that's very fast growing, how would that almost upend or almost transform the pre-existing incumbent ways of people moving in a city? That was our key question. And what was really interesting is the sort of asymmetric effect where we see e-scooter launch in a city, increasing ride-sharing usage, but on the flip side, it's decreasing, and almost we call it substitution. So there's a substitution of bike share systems in the Chicago area within the 41 weeks over which we collect data on actual rides. And the magnitude of effects was very mind-blowing, because you see on one hand, 16% jump and a positive increase in rideshare trips, but almost 7.6% decrease in bike share usage, which again, by itself is remarkable to think about, because it's kind of saying, well, we were introducing a sustainable new form of mobility, which could save the city, save the environment. And on the other hand, people are actually taking newer trips. It's expanding overall trip demand, which are now being met by car usage or rideshare trips that could actually be worse off in terms of carbon emissions. And also it's reducing people's use of other eco-friendly options like bike sharing.
Here's the question I was left with when I heard that for the first time. Why do e-scooters increase rideshare trips from services like Uber or Lyft?
Why is there this sort of complementarity with rideshare but substitution with bike share? And on the face of it, whenever I've presented this work widely, I've always gotten this reaction that, okay, the bike share effect is sort of intuitive because bike share and e-scooters are serving similar trips. They're both similar micromobility, lightweight options. So we can see why one would substitute the other. But what's happening with rideshare, like you asked me? And so we dug deeper into the data. We collected, again, publicly available data from Chicago government on over 8 million ride-sharing trips over the same period. And we started analyzing what are the most relevant rideshare trips happening near e-scooter pickup and drop off locations for every single e scooter trip. And what we started to find was this clear pattern that right before and after an e scooter trip, there's a peak in rideshare trips. So there's clustering right around that time within an hour and 2 hours before and after e-scooter trips, which was pointing to this complementarity. But we still didn't know where is this extra demand coming from. So we triangulate using data on trip visits. We could see that there are increases in trips people are making in general for these consumption type of activities. So going to a restaurant, dining visits.
If you speak marketing research, that's called a category expansion for rideshare and a category cannibalization for bikeshare. Scooters expand trip demand, then pair with cars for one leg of the trip, which pulls riders away from bikes. Translation: e-scooters make it easier to go somewhere, and then late at night, or with grocery bags, a car might bring you back. But all of those rides, it turns out, might be having some unintended side effects. Two specific threads bore out in the data: an increase in carbon emissions and an increase in some kinds of crime. E-scooters are often called a kind of micro-mobility, flexible new transport options to help us get around our cities. But the authors of this study found an interesting complication. That increase in rideshare trips as a result of higher trip demand, they're often solo trips, and that comes at a cost.
So this is a really interesting spillover also, or an indirect effect we didn't expect going in. So the idea here is to do back of the envelope calculations by looking at the number of trips people are making in addition using rideshare and taking per mile driven of carbon emissions that are output of using cars. On average, if you think about every single passenger vehicle mile driven, you think of 400 grams extra carbon dioxide emissions. And so when we trace this number back to our own results, where we see on average in a week, people are driving about 33 miles more in rideshare, that's how we can triangulate. And so doing those back of the envelope calculations, adding them to the bike share numbers gives us about 800 metric ton additional carbon emissions that could have been avoided if people were not making these extra car trips.
The second unintended effect is a rise in reported street and vehicle-related crimes.
Let me kind of backtrack a little bit. We started thinking about consumer safety because when we looked at, again, more phenomena-driven thinking, e-scooters seem to cause as much of a nuisance as much as their positive effects in general, just anecdotally. And there's been a lot of recent news and media around even violent crimes that e-scooters are being linked with. So we started looking at crime records throughout Chicago as part of measuring consumer safety. And what we found was it's really the street and vehicle related crimes that are assisted in some way by e-scooters.
But that's not all crime across the board. The study found no increases in violent crime or homicide.
So it could be a snatch and run crime. It could be break into a vehicle. Those are the types of crimes that are increasing, but the magnitude again was pretty astounding, almost 18%, mostly tied to this e-scooter phenomena. And we also saw that more of it was happening when there was less sort of surveillance going on, so more on the weekends or more in non-peak traffic hours when there's not a lot of crowd on the road. So that pointed to, again, a more cohesive story about what could be the reason why crime is going up. And again, certain kinds of crime. So I want to caveat this by saying that we don't see an increase in violent crime or gun violence or homicide.
That's a lot of unanswered questions about a new technology. In some ways, that's the nature of this kind of research.
So I think this is one of those early micromobility papers that's raising more questions than giving answers, which I think is a good thing. That's how we make progress and move forward. So my key lessons would be just a little bit of caution in addition to being the technology optimist I am at heart. And the caution comes from if e-scooters are boosting the economy and leading to all these positive effects on how people consume and spend, how they move, their access to mobility. At the same time, we also need to be aware of some of these hidden costs that e-scooters come with as a new entrant in many cities still. So some of them I already highlighted are additional carbon emissions, which we weren't accounting for before. Some of them could be additional safety concerns for consumers, which again are becoming really important as a marketeer. So ultimately, consumer safety is also a case for good business.
That could mean changes in planning, lighting, or design of public spaces, smarter dock placement for bikes where e-scooters are sparse, and a keen eye on how things develop as micro-mobility options expand. So a small scooter turns out to be a powerful lever. It shifts how we move, travel, and live in the city. But what makes this research special for Unnati?
The topic is very much aligned with my interest in how technologies impact firms and consumers. And this is one of the first papers where I'm able to go beyond typical economic retail related outcomes that has been my bread and butter in marketing. So to be able to say something that can change the way people think about societies and cities and how we live is really powerful. The second reason I'm so proud of this work is because it's my first paper with a PhD student that I mentored. And that was just a very rewarding, it was a tough, very difficult time, but very rewarding for both of us, I like to believe. So I think having mentored a student on this project has been very rewarding personally as well.
An interesting data story and a mentorship story about how new ideas move. That was Assistant Professor of Business Administration Unnati Narang. The paper is called How E-Scooters Impact Shared Mobility and Consumer Safety. It's published in the Journal of Marketing. You can read more about research like this coming out of Gies Business at giesbusiness.illinois.edu. I'm John Moist. This is Research Reverb. Thanks for listening.